You try to hand something over, a task, a function, a piece of work you have done reliably for years. You are confident the person you are handing it to is capable. You brief them, you answer their questions, and something in the execution, something goes wrong, or it comes out differently than it should. Or they come back to you with a question that you cannot quite believe needs to be asked. Because to you the answer is obvious. The answer was obvious to you because you have done this hundreds of times. The knowledge is in your body. Every decision point, every standard, every adjustment you make automatically, all of it exists in your head, not in a document, not in a form anyone else can follow without you there to fill in the gaps. That is not a people problem. It is a process problem. And specifically, it is the problem of a process that lives in your head rather than in your business. In the last video, we defined a system as the combination of people, processes, information, and standards organized to produce a reliable outcome. A process is one of those four components and the most fundamental one. Every system contains processes. A system without documented processes is a framework with no operational content. You know what you want to produce. You do not yet have the reliable sequence that produces it. This video defines precisely what a process is in the structural sense, and it addresses the question the content architecture puts at the center of this concept. Not whether you have a process, but where it lives. A process is a documented, repeatable sequence of steps that, when followed reliably, produces a defined output. 3 words are doing structural work in that definition. Documented. It exists outside of a person's head, written down, accessible, followable, without the author being present. An undocumented process is a habit, valuable but not transferable without the person who holds it. Repeatable. It produces the same output each time it is executed correctly. A process that produces variable outputs depending on who runs it, not yet a process in the structural sense. It is an approach. Repeatably is what makes a process a business asset rather than an individual skill. Sequence. The steps are in a specific order and the order matters. A process is not a checklist of things to do in any sequence. It is a defined sequence in which each step builds on the last and leads to the next. Getting that sequence right is what makes the output consistent. Documented, a repeatable sequence when all 3 are present. The process is structural. When anyone is absent, the process is still, in some important sense, in someone's head. Most founders have processes. The question is where they live. A head-held process exists in one or more people's knowledge. It was developed through experience, refined through repetition, and more reliable through iteration. The person who holds it knows exactly what to do and in what order, at what standard, but it exists in their memory and their judgment, not in a document. A head-held process can only be transferred through direct instructions, side-by-side observation, or trial and error. Every time someone new needs to learn it, the transfer depends on the person who holds it, being available, patient, and consistent in how they communicate it, which is rarely reliably true. A business-held process exists in a document. It is written down in a form that is followable, step by step, by anyone with the right capability, regardless of whether the person who developed it is present. The knowledge has been externalized. It no longer depends on a specific person being available to transfer it. The move from head-held to business-held is not a redesign of the process. It is a documentation of it. The founder's existing way of doing things already refined. Already reliable is the starting point. The work is making it explicit and accessible. The trigger, the event or condition that starts the process. Not every process runs continuously. It starts when something happens. A client signs a contract, a new team member joins, an invoice is issued. The trigger defines when the process begins, and it ensures it starts consistently, not only when someone remembers to initiate it. The steps, the documented sequence of actions in the right order that moves the work from trigger to output. Each step should be specific enough to be actionable and clear enough that the person following it does not need to ask clarifying questions at that point. If a step requires a judgment call, that is a decision point, not a step. The decision points, the moments within the process where a choice must be made, and the criteria for making it. If a client responds positively, do this. If they do not, do that. Decision points are the most frequently undocumented element of a process because the founder makes these calls automatically. Documenting them is what makes the process followable by someone else. The output, what the process produces when all steps are completed correctly. The deliverable, the completed action, the outcome of the process was designed to generate. Defining the output precisely is what makes the process testable. You can check whether the process was executed correctly by checking whether the output meets the definition, the standard. The criteria against which the output is judged. What does good look like? What is the threshold that confirms the process has been executed correctly? The standard is what connects the process to the system's quality requirement, and it is what allows the person running the process to self-assess their work rather than needing the founder to validate it. Here is what processes that live in heads rather than in the business produce practically, persistently, and at cost. Inconsistent execution. The same task done differently by different people, not because anyone is careless, but because there is no single documented sequence that everyone follows. The output varies by person rather than by standard. Knowledge loss when people leave. The person who holds a critical head-held process resigns or is absent, and the process leaves with them or has to be rebuilt from scratch. This is among the most underestimated risks in founder-led business because the impact only becomes visible when it's too late. Failed delegation. The founder tries to hand over a task and it comes back wrong or incomplete or requiring re-explanation. Because the process the founder expected the person to follow was never communicated in a followable form, the handover fails and the founder takes the task back. Observation-dependent onboarding. New people learning by watching rather than by following, which is slower, more inconsistent, and dependent on the availability of the person being observed. Although there's a lot to be said about person-led learning in the workplace. A documented process makes onboarding to a standard rather than to a person. Founder re-involvement at exception points. Every time something unusual happens, a client asks an off-script question, a delivery hits an unexpected obstacle, the founder gets called in because the exception handling logic was never documented and the team does not know how to navigate it without them. Processes start head-held. That is how they develop. The founder tries something, refines it, makes it reliable through repetition. By the time it is working well, it is deeply embedded in their knowledge and their instinct. It was never designed to be written down. It was designed to work. It does. It really does. The documentation work is not a correction of how the process developed. It is a recognition that the process has become valuable enough to the business and it needs to exist independently of the person who created it. The move from head held to business held is a sign that the process has matured, not that it was built wrong. Here is what the work of documenting a process actually involves. Start with the output. Before you document a single step, be very clear about what the process is designed to produce. The output definition is the anchor. Something in the documentation serves the purpose of reaching that output reliably. Walk through the steps from trigger to output. Do it yourself or with the person who currently holds the process. Document each step as it actually happens, not as it theoretically should happen. The working version is the starting point. Identify the decision points. As you walk through the steps, mark the moments where you make judgment calls. Ask yourself, what am I assessing here and what are the possible paths forward? Document the criteria. And this is the most effortful part of the documentation and the most valuable. Define the standard. Write down what the outputs look like when the process has been executed correctly. Be specific, not to high standard, but the actual criteria that define acceptable output. This is what makes the process self-assessable. Test it. Give the document to process to someone who has not run it before and ask them to follow it. Where do they get stuck or make a different choice than you would have made is where the documentation needs to be clearer. The test does reveal the gaps. To summarize, a process is a documented, repeatable sequence of steps that reliably produces a defined output. 3 words are structural, documented, repeatable, sequence. When all 3 are present, the process is a business asset. When any is absent, it is still, in some important sense, in someone's head. Most founder-led businesses have their most critical processes held in the founder's head or in individual team members' knowledge. They exist and they work, but they are not transferable without the person who holds them. The documentation work is making them business held, explicit, accessible, and followable by anyone with the right capability. A well-documented process contains 5 elements: a trigger, the steps, decision points, output, and the standard. Together, they make the process complete enough to run without the author being present. In the last video, we defined the system. In this video, we defined the process. The next question is, how does a founder-led business know whether its processes are actually being followed, whether they are producing the outcomes they were designed to produce? That is what KPIs are for, not reporting for investors, although can do, but the measurable infrastructure that makes operational visibility possible at the process level. Video 12 defines what a KPI actually is and why, without them, operational visibility is opinion rather than data.